Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We are glad that you can join us today, and if it's your first time joining us on Atlas Information, welcome. We are happy to have you here. And for those of you who have been sticking around the past few weeks, it has to be over a month now, you know that we've been cycling through words, beginning with emptiness and fullness and oneness. And last week we talked about separation. This week, serendipitously, we received a communique from a friend of ours who was facing their own challenge of the elements, specifically the element of water. We've talked about this in the past, sharing our own test dealing with water. And we've talked about the test of the elements, initiations of the elements, and how these are initiations that our innermost being undertakes in the supernal worlds. And as our innermost being undertakes these initiations in the supernal worlds, we experience shadowy reflections of those initiations, as above, so below. So we will undergo some sort of test or trial or ordeal which relates to the specific element, the specific initiation that our innermost is undertaking in the supernal worlds. And so very often we might find ourselves confronted with some challenge, some little mini cataclysm, some, in the case of water, very often tests of water, initiations of water, come in the form of some form of flood or flooding or plumbing disaster, or perhaps some form of torrential rainfall, or us getting stuck out in the elements, or having to deal with the element of water in that particular case. But it could be one of the other elements as well. It could be wind, it could be fire, it could be earth. And fiery elements often come as, we experience them as burning sensations. So we can undergo initiations of fire, not necessarily with our house burning down or something to that effect. Like, it doesn't have to be physical fire. It can simply be the metaphysical element of fire testing us. So it could be anger, it could be anger, it could be rage, it could be some other form of psychological burning. It could be a burning desire. And often the initiations of fire, the element, that burning desire is obviously, it's lust, right? It is what it is. And we can experience that. We can undergo such ordeals here as a reflection of the initiation which our innermost being is undertaking in the supernal worlds. And so we will be tested accordingly. Now, why do we bring this up? Because today's talk is about connection. And Last week we talked about separation and being separated from ourselves, feeling divorced from our innermost and feeling isolated and desolated. And we talked about how very often we feel that way, completely alone in the world, cast out, wandering in the desert. There are all of these allegories in the Bible and elsewhere in literature that expresses the that aspect of the hero's journey, but also the journey itself, having to leave the comfort and security of home to some far-flung land or some other place, the other world. Remember we were talking about the crossing the threshold from the known to the unknown, from the normal world to the special world, to the underworld. And that crossing of that threshold represents a kind of separation and throwing our fates to the wind, as it were. So when we are in that place, when we are in that special world, that other world, the underworld, and we are feeling that separateness, that aloneness, that isolation, that desolation, what can save us, the only thing really that can truly save us and truly allow us to fulfill our mission and accomplish our task as a hero undertaking that journey, having descended into our own personal hell, into our own underworld. The only thing that can truly save us from that hell and from the demons therein, from the monsters in that labyrinth, in that underworld, is our connection. And that connection is there for us when we need it the most. Precisely when we are most challenged. It's precisely when we feel most threatened or when we are facing some overwhelming circumstance. It is precisely then that we are most connected. But very often, we don't know that. We don't recognize that. We don't acknowledge that because we're not observing ourselves and we're not remembering ourselves. We're not paying attention. We're getting caught up in the crises that we face. We're identifying with all of the emotional reactions and mental reactions of our mind, saying, oh my God, like what the hell's going on? And why is this happening to me? And all of this kind of stuff. And so we get our capacity to know our connection and recognize it gets drowned out by all this noise, by this cacophony of overreaction, emotional, mental, physical. We might find our body shaking with fear, tremoring with fear, or going through some sort of convulsions, or sweat pouring down our face, on our brow, because we're under so much stress, we're under so much duress, facing this challenge. And all of that physical, emotional, and mental reaction, it it eats up our consciousness. It feeds on our consciousness. It's all drawing attention to itself. And it's keeping us from actually being in the moment and experiencing the circumstances objectively as they are. And we fail to connect to the moment. And because we fail to connect to the moment, we fail to connect with ourself. Because that crisis, that test, that ordeal that we're facing is precisely there for our innermost, for the consciousness to experience. Our innermost being is present in those moments of crises. They are experiencing those circumstances through us, but they require our cooperation and our mental faculties and our emotional faculties and our physical body in order to be able to deal with those circumstances. And if we are allowing ourselves to get caught up in our thoughts and our emotions and our sensations and our physical reactions, our ego reactions, then we are forgetting ourselves and we're not in the moment. What we are in is our thoughts and our emotions and our physical reactions. That's what we're experiencing. That's what we get lost and caught up in. And the more we identify and the more we identify with and become attached to those reactions, the more disconnected we remain, or the more disconnected we feel. It is the irony that it be this way, but it's also this way by design. This is the test, this is the game that the supernal worlds play. To be in the world, but not of the world. And to the degree that we are asleep, and this humanity is asleep, this humanity is in the world and of the world. And the relationship between ourself and our innermost being is that of a loyal servant. But if a servant cannot hear the commands of their Lord, then, especially when facing crises and circumstances that are fit for a Lord to face, when we think of a servant and a Lord, we can think of a medieval knight and their squire. Now, a knight, wears his armor and has his weapons and his lance and, rides on his war horse and all that sort of stuff. And a knight in medieval times and medieval feudalism was a lord, was noble, part of the nobility. And such a knight would have a squire, and that squire was responsible for doing things like helping the knight put on his armor and keeping the armor well greased. The chainmail, for example, or the other bits of armor and the swords and everything else well oiled and greased so it wouldn't rust in the elements, and helping him on his horse or off his horse if he was in full armor, which is not an easy thing to do. And basically, a was basically like a manservant to a lord, but specifically to a knight. And the squire was skilled in all of the activities and all of the duties and all of the tasks that a knight required. A knight could not undertake an adventure, could not undertake a quest without his squire. Because how could he get into his armor? How could he get onto his horse? How could he do all the things that he needed to be done just by himself? So the squire was essential for the hero to be able to go on a quest and fulfill his quest. In the same way, our innermost being can't be here and now and present without us. That's what we are. We are the physical vessel, the physical vehicle of our true self, of our innermost. But just like if in the face of danger or in the face of a dark, scary forest or, scary noises in the night, howling wolves and who knows what, if the squire gets afraid or scared or freaks out and runs away and abandons his lord, abandons his knight, two things happen. One, the knight can't fulfill his quest, can't continue on his quest. And number two, that squire, that servant, leaves themselves terribly vulnerable, without any protection, all alone, separated, like we were talking about last week, isolated and desolated. They are a team. They must work together. This is reflected in so many different heroes and superheroes who have sidekicks, whether it's Sherlock Holmes and Watson. It's Dr. Watson. He's not a dumb fellow, but he's also the muscle. He does a lot of the physicality and a lot of the he very often he saves Sherlock Holmes in various circumstances. And then we have Batman and Robin, and we have we can go all the way back into the Hindu pantheon. We have Rama and Hanuman. And Hanuman is the famous monkey deity. And Rama is his lord and master. And they're on a quest to find and free Krishna, which is the Christ. So there with Krishna, Rama, and Hanuman, we have the 3-step levels of Hanuman, the monkey god. He's the one that develops all of these powers and abilities. He does a lot of the work in the Ramayana. But Rama is his lord. And they're on a quest to save Krishna. So we have Rama, the innermost. We have Hanuman, the physical vessel, who does develop powers. And they are together working as a team to rescue Krishna, to rescue the Christ, to liberate the Christ, to free the Christ, or to, again, using the Christian mythology, to resurrect the Christ or give birth to the Christ. And it is that partnership that relationship and the orientation, knowing our place in that partnership in which we can find the root of the connection we seek, the foundation of the connectedness that we all long for in our life. And more importantly, it will become for us the mooring in the storm that we can tie our vessel to, so that no matter what winds blow and what stormy seas come our way, we moor ourselves to this rigging, to this mooring, so that we know that we are connected and that we are not forsaken, we're not forlorn, and we're not going to be lost at sea. And that the captain of the vessel will come. And if you want to take it one step further, the light of the lighthouse will guide us and guide the captain through the storm, through the darkness, through the difficulties, and through the treacherous waters. And that we, the vessel, will not be forsaken and will not be abandoned. That connection is key to that, but it's our appreciation of our place in the order of things. If we think too highly of ourselves, and if we suffer too much of mystic pride, and we are too self-righteous, then when the tough times come, when the challenges come, when the tests come, and the trials and ordeals come, we will face them with indignity. And we will shake our fist at the heavens, and we will say, woe is me, or why is this happening to me, or why does this always have to happen to me, or what did I do to deserve this? And we'll get caught up in all of these mental gymnastics, these psychological evasions, these stories we tell ourselves, and really they're stories that our egos are telling us and hypnotizing us with. I didn't deserve this. What did I do to deserve this? Or I'm always getting the short end of the stick, and why can't I have it easy like all those other people? And all, it just, all the other things that we tell ourselves when things don't go our way, or we think that things aren't going our way because we're confronting some crisis or challenge or test or ordeal or whatever the case may be. And we fail in those moments to recognize that it's our innermost being that has to go through this, which means we have to go through this. It's not about us. Your life, whatever you may think, has never been about you. That's a very, very bitter pill to swallow. It's one that the ego cannot take. It's one that the ego cannot accept. What do you mean my life isn't about me? It's my life. Okay. But where does that leave your true self then? The connection between the self and the self is all that matters. And maintaining that connection is a two-way street. And all of the elements responsible for our separation, they get dialed up to 11 the more difficult and more challenging things become. And they get dialed up to 11 the easier and more comfortable things become. It's always, if you think of the Pareto distribution, right, the bell curve, it's always in the tails, in the extremes, that we find the ego most active and most powerful, most energized. So when we have tremendous comfort and security, we discover just how lazy we are capable of being, and how unmotivated we are, and how we are able to just let days and weeks go by without meditating, without doing any practices, without working on ourselves, and without thinking about others, because we're just basking in the comfort and security of an easy life. And we relish that. We relish that. We enjoy that whenever we can take advantage of that. And the egos take advantage of us in those moments, because the egos take advantage of that. And on the flip side, it's when things really go to hell that likewise we get a completely different set of egos coming to seek to take advantage of us. Fear, anger, envy, pride, in some cases lust, because remember, our discomfort can come in many different ways. And one of the ways that our discomfort can come is in sexual arousal. It's one of the tests, right? We were talking about the different initiations of elements, and one of the element of fire, one of the ways that we can be tested is through our lust. We burn, the burning desire comes and takes us over. And the greater the temptation, the more deeply that desire burns. And again, those times, those circumstances afford us a unique opportunity to know ourselves and to know that connection and to become conscious of our connection in ways that our daily life, our mundane everyday life, possibly doesn't afford us the same opportunities. Because when you're doing dishes or mowing the lawn or riding the bus or driving to work or doing tasks at work day in and day out, these mechanical behaviors, these habitual behaviors that you've done 1,000 times before and you'll do 1,000 times again, and you just on autopilot, and you're just, your mind is wandering, it's on a million different things, and your body is going through the motions, doing it mechanically because of out of muscle memory and out of habit and everything else. And we just go through life like automatons on autopilot. and our mind is wandering and thinking about other things, thinking about, worrying about the future, obsessing about the past, thinking about others and what they think about us and our reputation and this and that and our finances and our love life and all the rest of it, all the other stuff, all the places we'd rather be and all the things we'd rather be doing than what we're doing right now in the moment. And it's that mundane, everyday, the vast majority of our time in that middle space under the bell curve, that's our mediocre, boring life, that genuine spirituality and that genuine connectedness, it goes unnoticed. And because we're just caught up in that the everyday business of living, and we forget ourselves, we don't observe ourselves, and, like, as I said, we go through all these things mechanically like an automaton. But because we've done it 1,000 times, and there's no particular urgency, there's no particular threat, there's no crises, it's just everyday normal behavior, so there's just no urgency about any of it. So nothing's dialed up to 11. And likewise, the input of our being, again, goes under the radar because everything is just being done totally mechanically, and our mind is off wandering, and and we're not really present there either, because we've done these things a million times and we're not really present. It's very difficult to be connected to oneself if one is disconnected from the moment, because the moment is boring or mundane or blasé or whatever it is, or I've done it a million times. Why do I have to be present again? I'm just washing the dishes. There's a Buddhist saying. It says, Buddha said, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. And the implication there is just be present. Be where you are. Be present to what you are doing. It's a line from The Empire Strikes Back, when Yoda complains to Obi-Wan Kenobi about how Luke Skywalker isn't ready to become a Jedi. And Yoda says, long, long have I watched this one. Always worried about always thinking about the future or the past. His mind never on where he was, what he was doing. Believe it or not, your innermost being is here now to experience where you are and what you are doing. If you're not interested in where you are and what you're doing, you're not going to be paying attention. You're not really going to be present. And that's going to prevent your innermost being from being truly present. Because for better or for worse, we have the ability to direct our attention, to direct our awareness. And if our awareness is being hijacked by these thoughts or these emotions or these sensations, and we're allowing the stream of consciousness in our mind to take our consciousness and run away with it. You've experienced this. You know exactly what we're talking about. When you're sitting there, you're trying to meditate, and all of a sudden you snap out of it and you realize 10 minutes have gone by, and you let yourself get carried away on a train of thoughts, and you have to bring yourself back to the meditation, and you have to try to come back and identify what was the thought that grabbed your attention, that led you on this train of thought, this tangent. This is, in many ways, the work. It's a key aspect of self-observation and self-remembering, what people refer to as mindfulness, presence, being. And of the new age gurus, the person who makes the most of this, from the best we can tell, is Eckhart Tolle. And he makes this the pinnacle of utmost of importance in his teaching, because he's all about presence, and he's all about, teaching that. We don't follow him enough to know how far he takes it, but we're fairly certain he doesn't take it to the point of speaking about the being and about the true self and the relationship between the vessel and the true self. But we here can comprehend that relationship, can develop that relationship, and can work practically with that relationship. For us, connectedness to our true self is not some vague spiritual new age mumbo jumbo. And it's also not about the end goal of finding, peace and comfort and security. Peace will come. Relaxation can be there. This is, in fact, the whole point of martial arts. Martial arts as one of many practices, but the martial arts specifically, a practice whereby one puts the physical body under duress of the most threatening nature, from a pure primal animal perspective, right? Being attacked physically, being assaulted, or having to confront an assailant. And having to use the physical body to defend oneself, to disarm one's assailant and subdue one's assailant, and to be able to do all that while maintaining one's psychological composure. When we studied acting, our acting sensei, George Luscombe, taught us about maintaining controlled relaxation. We had to be able to, on stage, produce the effect of anger or fear or any number of egos. But internally, as the actor, as the artist, we had to learn how to maintain our composure, controlled relaxation. We were using the energy and we were sculpting the energy, but we couldn't allow ourselves to get caught up in the psychology of the characters and the actions and the events that we were playing. This was not method acting. Even a martial artist, a master, will tell you that the moment you lose your temper is the moment where you've lost the the confrontation. You've lost the fight. Martial arts masters will tell you that the confrontation, your battle, the conflict is never with your opponent. It's always with yourself. And certainly the Shaolin monks who practice martial arts as part of their Buddhist practice see it that way. And that martial discipline and learning to work with their bodies physically and be able to endure all of that hardship, all of those tests, trials, and ordeals in that physical plane while maintaining emotional and mental composure. This is for them one of the aspects of tapping into the strength of their innermost, the source of our strength, the true source of our strength. Our egos want to convince us that they are the source of our strength, that fear and anger and pride are what drive and motivate us and protect us in times of danger. But we know from our experience that fear and anger and pride do not serve us in times of crises. They cause chaos, they cause suffering, they cause all kinds of problems. And even if somehow fear and anger, somehow the end result is we survive, and fear and anger take credit for our survival, the reality is that our state of mind during the crisis and just after the crisis is completely calamitous. We know that from experience. In confrontations with those we love, if fear and anger get involved and overtake us and we become possessed by fear or possessed by anger, we know because we've all said and done things which almost immediately we have regretted saying and doing. And that and the same pride that made us lash out against those we love, that very same pride turns into shame and guilt moments later. And it feeds on us before and after. Made us lash out to begin with, and then after the fact makes us feel ashamed and guilty about what we did. It plays both sides. And we get played in the process. And that entire time we're caught up, whether it's our pride or our shame, it's the same ego. And we're caught up in that, we're identified with it. That's all we're thinking about and worrying about. And all that energy is being wasted through that ego. And our consciousness, our awareness, our the currency of our higher self is being debited, is being trapped, enslaved. And the currency, the only currency that we have to know ourselves with, is being hypnotized and enslaved and hijacked by the false self, by egos. Working through our mind, working through our heart, working through our body. and we are disconnected. Because really, you can think of consciousness as bandwidth. And just imagine, perhaps you're old enough to know the first modems on computers when you had to dial up on a landline and you dialed into what was called a BBS, or a bulletin board service. We dialed up on an 800 baud modem or a 1200 baud modem to try to download a 64 kilobyte file or something, and it would take half an hour. It was when you have so little bandwidth, you gain access to, so very little information. It's like the speed of your internet connection determines how slowly videos download, or at what resolution you can stream live video. And our consciousness works much the same way in relation to our connectedness. Is that if it's like in your house, if you have 10 people all using the Wi-Fi all at once, and all of them are trying to watch a different movie on Netflix all at the same time, and someone's doing Skype, and someone's playing an online game, and 3 other people are watching different Netflix series, this is all eating up the bandwidth, right? So then when you want to try to download something, you can only watch it at like 360 resolution now, because you're trying to live stream a video, or and there's just not enough bandwidth to be able to do it in high resolution. So you now have to watch your video at low resolution. And given enough people on enough devices, eventually your bandwidth is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, like a contracting iris on a camera, and less light can get through. Less and less light can get through. That's why we always emphasize self-observation and self-remembering, because your egos are going to react. And there's nothing you can do about that. And you shouldn't try to suppress or repress your emotions, or try to block out your egos and somehow try to prevent them from reacting, because the energy and the effort and the consciousness that you are trying to exert in order to do that is going to have a deleterious effect. The key is to allow whatever mechanical reactions are taking place inside of you to take place, and simply observe them. Not indulge them, not get carried away by them, not become attached to them, not identify with them. So when your fear gets triggered, or your anger gets triggered, your rage, and you see it raging inside of you, that you have the ability to observe it and say, oh, there's my anger. There's my fear. There's my pride. There's my lust. Wow, it's really raging. Okay, there it goes. But you remain identified with the observer, not what you're observing, but the observer of what you're observing. So you're observing your egos, but you're not identifying with them. And so this reorients your bandwidth, your consciousness, from getting caught up and enslaved by the very egos that are reacting. and simply keeping your consciousness free to observe the mechanical elements doing their thing. You're not getting caught up in it, just passively and relaxed and observant. And this is the bedrock, the foundation for acquiring the information you need in order to comprehend those mechanical elements inside of yourself. That comprehension does not take place in your mind. It doesn't take place in your emotional body. It certainly doesn't take place in your physical body. That comprehension takes place within the consciousness. And so you must have worked with the consciousness to observe what you are studying, what you are analyzing, to be able to have witnessed those egos. Because that is the data, the experiential knowledge, the gnosis, from which timeless universal truths can be extracted. It's to the nature of that mechanicity, the nature of those egos and how they cause you and others suffering. That is the experiential knowledge, the wisdom or the gnosis, which is extracted from the experience. But you must be present and aware. You must be observing. You must be connected to the events, to the circumstances, to these mechanical entities and their reactions. You remain connected via consciousness, but not attached to, identified with, lost in, carried away by, carried away with. We have that. We have those expressions, right? We do something, we say something, we go on a tirade, we go on a rant, we smash some things, and moments later we say, "Oh my God, I don't know what possessed me." Or we say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I just got carried away. Please forgive me." Right? We allow ourselves to get carried away by these mechanical entities, these egos. We cannot be connected and carried away at the same time. You know that. You've observed that in yourself. You have these experiences. You know what we are talking about. You also have had experiences where you have faced some extraordinary set of circumstances, and you have remained present and alert, and you've watched yourself do incredible things. Everyone has experienced this. Not everyone acknowledges who was doing the incredible things and through whom those incredible things were being done. And the reason is because our egos are way too eager to take credit for every good thing that we've ever done or every amazing thing that we've ever done. The ego leaps to the front line to take credit for that. And it's just unbelievable to us anyway. I mean, it's unbelievable, but it's of course believable that we see so many people going through life with such mystic pride, but they don't even acknowledge their innermost being. They don't acknowledge their divine mother. They don't acknowledge their true self. They actually think that they're the smart one, that they're the spiritual one, that they're the holy one, and that they do all these great things for all these great people, and they develop these powers, and they're clairvoyant, and they can read minds, and they can do this and they can do that, and they honestly believe that it's all them, that they are enlightened, and that they are awakened, that they are masters, and they are ascended ones, or they will soon be ascending, and they believe that. It's a completely different form of separation. They're connected, but they openly deny the connection by laying claim to everything they receive through that connection, by allowing their egos to take credit for it. And then they take it one step further, right? Because as soon as you start thinking that way, you start falling into the traps of the law of attraction and unlimited abundance and manifesting your desires. And so it's not long before they start practicing black magic wholeheartedly, believing that they're great magicians and that they're great spiritual guides and gurus and healers and all the rest of it. And these people are all awakening negatively. They're all awakening through their egos. The more their egos take credit, and the more they feed their egos that belief and their consciousness and their energy and everything, and the more they channel everything through themselves as the magician, the more they are going to become exactly what they desire to be, black magicians. The more they will fulfill that belief, and they will crystallize that belief and make that belief a reality. And their consciousness and their higher self will become more and more imprisoned in the delusion, in the illusion, but it's a delusion of the false self. And that's how black magicians and demons are born. The connection is still there, but it's hijacked. The consciousness hypnotized. The consciousness is awakening. And all those powers and abilities that belong to the being are being siphoned off and hijacked, appropriated by the ego, by the false self. But coming back to it, there are moments, we've all had them, where we faced some extraordinary challenge and we've surprised ourselves. We watched ourselves just do things that we never thought possible. We never imagined we'd be able to do them, or that we could rise to the challenge and face these things and take on these challenges. And we're here to say today that if you've ever experienced anything like that, then that's a fantastic opportunity for you to retrospect on that event in meditation and comprehend that in those moments You are all but completely being controlled by your innermost being. If you've ever faced a circumstance or situation and you, quote, surprised yourselves, you shocked yourself at what you were capable of, that's because you were not capable of it. What you were capable of was coming through you, not coming from you. And in fact, we're here to tell you that most times in your life, whenever you're doing anything, you're not so much doing as you are being done. That's what a human being is. It's just that you're not aware of it. We became acutely aware of this throughout our life at several different times in our life. And another circumstance was, again, we were saying this week when we had a friend who was suffering from going through a plumbing disaster. And she found herself having to just overnight, like in an instant, just basically, she's a very handy person, a very do-it-yourself kind of person to begin with, very good with tools and this and that to begin with. But she found herself like in a moment's notice having to like essentially become a plumber. um, and it was interesting because to hear her say, tell her story, because it reminded us of our own crisis of water, which we've shared with you in the past. Um, our kung fu dojo being flooded, and that in those moments we just we had never faced anything like that before in our life, and yet we just knew what to do and when to do and how to do it, and we had about all the other people in the studio, and we were barking orders at them, telling them what to do and how to do it, and everybody was just following our orders because nobody knew what to do. So they were just happy somebody knew what they were doing. And yet we were watching ourselves going through the motions, going through all this stuff, watching ourselves do all this stuff, realizing that I don't know what I'm doing, that Attlas knows what he's doing. And I just completely gave myself to Attlas in that event. And we ended up saving the studio and saving tens of thousands of dollars of damage and everything else, just because just allowing and surrendering to Attlas, to my higher self, and allowing myself to be a human being done, instead of thinking that somehow I got to do something about this. No, I have to allow myself to be done because I'm not qualified. Right? I'm not qualified to give these talks. I'm not qualified to write the book. And yesterday, I was cleaning the house. Which I've done. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've cleaned the house ever since I was a kid. Doing chores was always a big thing with my family, and so it's just remains. That's just one of the things that I do, is I do the cleaning. And in advance of today's talk, I became very acutely aware of all these different, what would you say, tricks, not tricks. Habits is not the right word either. Just ways that we go about cleaning, things that we do in the way that we do them. And I became acutely aware that most of the time I don't give it any second thought. But yesterday, specifically, I found myself in a very meditative state while performing my chores. And I became acutely aware of my attention being directed, and how, believe it or not, right, I don't even clean. I don't even clean the house. Atlas cleans the house. And it's something that I have been doing ever since I was a kid. And I sort of do, like, again, I freely admit, right? I do it automatically, like, I wouldn't say unconsciously, but after having cleaned the house, like vacuumed and mopped floors, and, you know, having done it so many times, it's like second nature. It's like automatic. It's just like you're on autopilot. And then yesterday I was just made acutely aware that no, you I might think I'm on autopilot, but I'm not on autopilot. Atlas is cleaning. Atlas is present and aware, and he's connected. And what I do and how I do it and how I react to certain circumstances related to that particular task, what I notice, where my attention is drawn, how I choose to go about doing things. It's not random. It's not automatic. The automatic mechanical side of it is how I'm bored with it, how I've done it a million times, how I take for granted how it gets done and who's doing it. We want to share with you a quote. Oh, hang on a second. We've got a bunch of comments. First of all, we didn't share the link to pop on the live stream. So there it is on screen, and it's also in the chat. And we've been negligent with the chat. So let's get caught up on chats. Azazel says, memories can be tricky in that regard. He says it can easily trigger feelings of guilt, sadness, and so on. He's talking about when we allow ourselves get carried away by our egos, and we end up saying and doing things that we very quickly regret. From what I've heard, Jeanne d'Arc did not take much help from a squire, since she squired God. She slept in her armor and so on. And he also says, or when you did so and someone had to take a call, don't pick up. Can't remember what that was in reference to. Stuart says, we'll listen in as soon as possible. Azazel says, yeah, we had such a friend on Facebook, so we had to remove that. The thing you said about lost causes is true. And he says, it can't be reasoned with, and so on. Yeah. Well, we've all We've all experienced that. You know that you can't reason with someone who's trapped in their ego. They're going to believe what they're going to believe, and that's it, right? That's just the way it is. So we want to share with you the following. Give us a moment to get it on screen here. Okay. It's a quote, a famous quote by Patanjali. It reads, "When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new, great, and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be." Clearly, this quotation applies to not just the great purpose, that some extraordinary project that Patanjali is talking about here, but these dormant forces, faculties, and talents becoming alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. These what he's describing happens to us in these moments of crises, in these moments of challenge that we face in our lives, and that if we can remember to remain relaxed, to remain observant, to remain present, and to remember our innermost and remember our Divine Mother, and surrender to our higher self, and allow those dormant forces, faculties, and talents to come alive, to become alive in us. And we discover in those moments, we discover ourselves to be a greater person by far that we ever dreamt ourselves to be. It's because in those moments we are truly being done. We are truly being done. In those moments, we are a true human being. And it is the strength, the knowledge, the wisdom, the faculties of our innermost being which are flowing through us in order to face the challenges, the crises, the tests, the ordeals that have been beset upon us, because they're not there for us as individuals. They're there for us as human beings, as human beings being done. This is a very famous quotation. It's often used, especially in the New Age and self-help and everything else. And you'll notice that the reason why they like this quotation is because there's no reference here whatsoever to the innermost being and the true self. Everything's in the context of you. You are the great being. You are so much greater than what you thought you were, which is very much the mantra, the angle of the New Age. It's that self-helpy type stuff. completely lacking in humility, completely devoid of the metaphysical hierarchy and the order of things, which we argue is essential to the process of maintaining that connection. And with regards to that connection, Azazel says, don't pick up, it was regarding the old landline connection to the internet. Aha. When he said earlier, when the phone's ringing, and he said, don't answer it, don't answer it, don't answer it. Yeah, because if you were trying to download something from a BBS on a modem, and someone picked up the phone, that it would kill your connection, right? So imagine trying to use the internet, and someone called, or someone picked up the phone and made a call, and you're trying to use the internet. That's the world that we lived in before there was such a thing as dedicated data lines and dedicated internet connections and all that stuff. When you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and great and wonderful world. Not everyone is blessed with having such a great purpose, some extraordinary project. But everyone faces crises, everyone faces tests and challenges and ordeals. And everyone goes through their everyday mundane life. The capacity to maintain our connection comes from our ability to discern the source of our actions. Are we acting on the being impulse, or are we acting on ego desire? Are we acting consciously, or are we acting mechanically? And there's a third possibility, and that is, are we acting subconsciously or unconsciously? In which case, we're not paying attention and we have no idea where our actions are coming from. Are they coming from our subconscious mind, i.e., ego, or are they coming from our being, our unconscious mind, that which we are not conscious of, the meta mind of being? And we have no capacity for discernment because we're not even paying attention. So we don't even know. We're just acting automatically on autopilot, blah, 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 this and that, right? Like I said earlier, which is never the case. It's only unconscious, it's only subconscious because we're not paying attention, because our mind is wandering on other things. We're not truly present. We're not truly doing and being where we are and doing what we're doing. Instead, we're thinking about other things. We're doing other things mentally. And we're allowing our physical body to go through the motions, and we don't really know what's working through us in those moments. We're oblivious. We're ignorant. And we're ignorant because we're allowing our mind and our attention, our consciousness to be hypnotized and carried away. So, connection has nothing to do with us being forsaken. Connection has nothing to do with our innermost being abandoning us, or our Divine Mother abandoning us. How we need to comprehend connection and connectedness is, are we plugged in or are we unplugged? Are we actively connecting or are we allowing ourselves to be disconnected? Because that connection is always there. It's our conscious awareness of that connection which gets disrupted. It's like right now, chances are you are watching this on a dedicated internet line. And that internet line, whether it's cable or fiber optic or a DSL or whatever technology it is, it's always there in your home. But your connection to the internet depends on whether or not your device is turned on and whether or not you're paying attention to that device and that device is maintaining its connection to the internet. That's what your internet connection is dependent upon. So long as your internet service provider doesn't go down, your home is connected to the internet. Your connection, then, is entirely dependent on you. If you try connecting to your Wi-Fi, the internet's going to be there, assuming that all the technology is working and that your bills are paid. It's the same way with your being. Your internet connection does not, yes, on some level you can say it depends on the internet existing and not going down. But how often is that the case where the internet goes down? The internet is there. It's going to be there. 99.99999% probability that the internet is going to be fine. It's going to be there. Your connection to the internet depends on you. And your connection to your innermost being depends on you. To take this analogy a little bit further, imagine trying to have a conversation with someone on WhatsApp or Skype, on your phone or on your tablet. But while you're doing that, you're preparing dinner and you've got multiple things on the stove and you've got something in the oven and you've got kids running around and you've got your dog or your cat, which is barking or meowing because it's dinner time and they want their dinner too. And then maybe there's something spilled and you're trying to clean something up. And then maybe someone calls you and now you're trying to have a telephone conversation at the same time. So in other words, your attention is being pulled in all these different directions, right? How is your connection going to be to the individual on the internet? At some point you might say, well, you know what, I'll have to call you back, and you'll put your device down. You'll close your connection to the internet because there's just too much going on around you. Your connection to your innermost being depends on your ability to maintain focus, your ability to relax and concentrate and be in the eye of the storm and allow everything that's going around you to swirl around and around and around, but you remain focused and centered. Observing yourself and remembering yourself and identifying with the observer of everything that's going around instead of getting caught up in all the things going around you and identifying with it all. And then you can maintain your connection to the moment, presence, to being. And the more you can practice being, the more you will maintain your connection to your being. Funny that. Imagine that. So connection and being are synonymous. And in order to benefit from what Patanjali calls the dormant forces, faculties, and talents which become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamt yourself to be. Listen to the language that he's using here. These dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. And you discover yourself to be greater by far than you ever dreamt yourself to be. In Gnosis, there's a mantra or a chant or a prayer. I don't even know what you would call it exactly. Om be strength. Om be strength. Om be strength. Aum, the mantra of the heart. Be strength. Some recite this and they say Om be force or Om be power. We like to say strength because strength denotes something which you connect with, that becomes available to you, that you tap into, your inner source of strength. We don't like ideas of force and power and this and that because they lend themselves to mystic pride. Right? The gauntlet on the right hand of the hero or the sword in the hand of the swordsman relies on the strength and the skill of the swordsman. And yes, force and power channels through the blade, but they come from that inner source of strength that the swordsman possesses. Else, the sword is just a tool, inanimate. It's incapable of action. It's incapable of defense. It's incapable of anything without that source of strength exerting its power and its force. Azazel says, never heard that one. Yeah, it's you will only hear that in a gathering of Gnostics. You won't hear it online. You won't see it written down anywhere. Om be strength. But that strength is available to us at all times. The knowledge, the wisdom that we need in any given circumstance, in any given situation, to be and to be done is always there. Our connection to it is up to us. As Azazel says, we tend to use Sowilo and visualize the Sig rune. We just shared that Om be strength. Just it's not something that we use on a regular basis. It's just I don't even know how you'd say it's used in Gnostic circles. We heard it used most often in our dealings with AJAC. They like to use it a lot, particularly in gatherings where there were some prayers or chanting or some other practices or whatever that they would use to kind of finish the practice. It's for AJAC, I think, like to use it as instead of saying "so be it," or in conjunction with, "so mote it be," right? So be it. But the reason why we brought it up is in relation to this quote that we shared with you, is that our dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. They flow from the strength of our being and the strength of the connection that we have to our being. But that connection is up to us. It's not up to our being. It's not a question of our being is ignoring us or forgetting us or neglecting us sometimes and not other times. And sometimes, so therefore, sometimes we're connected and sometimes we're not. No, we neglect our being 99% of the time. And you know yourself, you know this is true. And it's not a judgment, it's not a condemnation. I'm the same. I'm no different. I would love to sit here and tell you that, oh, sure, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I'm constantly in a state of self-observation and self-remembering, and I'm completely aware of my connection to Attlas at all times. But no. And yesterday I was shown the next level of awareness and connection that I've yet to achieve. And that is being aware and present to Attlas cleaning, cleaning the house, cleaning the bird cage, scrubbing toilets, and realizing that, I'm trying to, I don't know, listen to music or listen to a podcast or allow my mind to wander and like get my mind off of what I'm doing because it's so damn boring and it's something that I don't know many people who enjoy doing. So I'm trying to actively avoid being present to, while one's scrubbing the toilet. It's not something that you sit there going and reveling in, going, oh yeah, boy, I'm scrubbing the toilet now. What a great experience. So we our mind wanders. We think about other things, or we're listening to a podcast, or we're listening to music, or we're talking to somebody on the phone, or we're thinking about and wanting to be anywhere but there. And yesterday I was put into this place where I was like, no, you Attlas wants to really scrub the toilet and really be present for that. And that it was my ego's boredom with it and distaste for it, which was causing me to actively avoid my connection. And that's why under that bell curve, we were saying like why 99% of the time, all of us feel so disconnected because 99% of the time we're doing all this mundane stuff. And it's only in the tails of the bell curve at the extremes when things get dialed up to 11, that's when our senses become heightened and our awareness becomes heightened. And then we are thrown into these circumstances of having to face these tremendous challenges, or some mini version of a tremendous project, some tremendous undertaking. Because you can look at this like, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, it doesn't mean we're talking about your life's work here. It's not mean that this doesn't mean that you need to be inspired to paint the Sistine Chapel, right? Like, it can be, oh my God, there's a crisis. People are relying on me. We've got to jump to their defense. We've got to jump to into action here. And we see ourselves leaping into the fray. And whether we're leaping into a burning building, or we're leaping into an icy river to save someone, or we're leaping into action and we're discovering all of these dormant forces, faculties, and talents flowing through us. And we're discovering that I never knew I had it. I didn't know I had it in me. I didn't know I had it in me. And yet, it's within all of us at all times. And just because 23 and a half hours of the day, right, 7 days a week, we go through these relatively mundane, boring, monotonous, repetitive existences, just going through the motions of our daily lives. It's so these dormant forces, faculties, and talents aren't really being called upon. We're not really challenging ourselves. We're not really being challenged. And listen to the language there. We are not really being challenged. The being challenged. These dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive when we are being challenged. And you know from your own experience, and you know from your experience of others, that most people avoid challenge. Most people don't want to rock the boat, and they don't want their boat being rocked. They like their comfort and security. They want things to go on the same way they've always gone on, because familiarity and that constancy and that regularity gives them that comfort and security. They don't want to be challenged. That's the opposite of why the being is here. So you have different expressions of this. You will find, again, this might apply directly to you, but you know it applies to others. You will find individuals who seek out specific challenges. So, for example, individuals who go rock climbing or do some kind of extreme sports, or they have some sort of hobby and they're constantly challenging themselves on this hobby to get to the next level or the next level or the next level. And they channel their inner longing to be challenged. They find some niche, some vertical niche in their life, and that they're able to get it out of their system, as it were. They're able to exercise that longing to be challenged. And so these dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive for them when they're doing this one specific thing that they do that makes them feel extraordinarily powerful or extraordinarily capable. So maybe they go downhill mountain biking, or they go extreme skiing, or extreme anything. And they're constantly pushing themselves and pushing themselves and pushing themselves. And, you know, a lot of people will dismiss them as being, oh, they're just adrenaline junkies. Well, yeah, maybe they are. Maybe they are adrenaline junkies, or these people who are bodybuilders or body sculptors, and and they're sort of, and they apply themselves to achieve this kind of extraordinary perfection in sculpting their body, or 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 anything for that matter. And the question that comes to mind is, are they doing those things at the expense of something else? And this is something that none of us can answer for anybody. It's a question we can only answer for ourselves. But one thing that we can say is that the ego seeks perfection in form, and the being seeks its own perfection. So we can say with absolute certainty that great artists like Leonardo da Vinci, like Mozart, like Michelangelo, like Beethoven, these individuals achieved a level of perfection in their art, in their craft. But these individuals were also all profound esotericists. And they went through tremendous psychological struggles. And that the perfection which manifests through their works, their artwork, their music, their sculpture, their paintings, and so on, is a reflection of the perfection that they are achieving in the internal worlds. Not all people who seek external perfection have that reciprocal process taking place inside of themselves. They're just obsessed with the external perfection. And they're completely identified and attached to the external perfection. And that's the difference, is that maintaining the connection to oneself, the great purpose, the great extraordinary project, is done through us. Whereas the externalized project is taking the impulse and the longing for that perfection, and it's being appropriated, it's being absconded through a process of mystic pride, through a process of ego identification, and it's being purely externalized. and it's being projected onto the world in some form, in some capacity, right? So, and Alexander wept, for there were no worlds left to conquer. That line exists in infamy as an expression of the megalomaniacal empire building of Alexander the Great, but it's also reflected in Napoleon and Genghis Khan and, yeah, even Attila the Hun. That what was inside of these individuals were forces, faculties, and talents of greatness, of enormous world level, world changing potential. And they were, instead of applied to some great purpose and extraordinary project, they were absconded and appropriated by ego to be applied to these megalomaniacal obsessions of conquering, of empire building, of, whatever the case may be. But you will also find that in those individuals, you talk to them, you ask them, these people who are obsessed with worldly achievement, worldly accomplishment, whatever that may be. They will tell you that it's the only time that they really feel alive. The rest of the time, they're just going through the motions. But when they're doing this one thing, that's when they really feel alive. That's when they really feel connected to the universe, to their purpose, to their, like, this is what I was born to do. This is who I was meant to be. There's a great documentary called Finding Joe about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell described what we're talking about as finding your bliss. Finding your bliss. Discovering that one thing that if you can't do, life is just not worth living. And it's that activity, that purpose, that project that makes you feel like, that gives your life meaning, that makes you feel like you belong here and that you're doing what you're meant to do, and that makes you feel truly connected. And that when you do, it's not so much that you do it, but you find yourself being done. And that these, dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and great and wonderful world when you are following your bliss, when you are on point, when you are on mission, when you are on the path. And I guess that's all well and good, and that's wonderful, and that's marvelous, and that many people who are body sculptors and bodybuilders and who, collect comic books or have other types of collections and or build empires or build multinational corporations and, become billionaires. And so a lot of people might say that that's their bliss, that they found their bliss, and maybe they have, maybe they haven't. What we are here to tell you is that that's all well and good, and that's fine. And for many people, that's all they're ever going to experience. But The key to connectedness is to gain access to these dormant faculties and forces and talents wherever you are, doing whatever you're doing. Even if you're just cleaning the house, even if you're scrubbing the toilet. It's like the Buddha said, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. But what you will find is chopping wood and carrying water becomes a great purpose, an extraordinary project. And all your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and great and wonderful world. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamt yourself to be. Just by doing what you've been doing, and just by doing what you have to do, chopping wood, carrying water, cleaning the house, driving the car, walking the dog, scrubbing the toilet, or in our case, yesterday, specifically, cleaning the bird cage. We had an experience yesterday which prepared us for this talk in a way that it is what it is. We were prepared for this talk. We didn't even post the topic for today until after we finished cleaning. We didn't have the topic until we finished cleaning out the bird cage, and we had a smile from ear to ear, and our heart was racing as we were discovering dormant forces, faculties, and talents. And that I realized that everything that I do with how that bird cage is put together and all the things that are in there for the bird to occupy him, and it's like, and my communion with the bird achieved a completely different, I was communing with that bird on a completely different level yesterday, just by cleaning the bird cage. And it became an extraordinary project. And all my thoughts broke their bonds, and my mind transcended limitations, and my consciousness expanded. In every direction, I found myself to be in a new and a wonderful world. Cleaning the bird cage. Why? Because I was present and aware and observing. I was, for the first time, really and truly cleaning the bird cage. Practically, every movement, everywhere my eye was being drawn, I became conscious of the being impulse working through me. And I ceased all automatic, mechanical, habitual thoughts, tendencies, behaviors, and I was cleaning the bird cage for the first time. Azazel said we had a similar experience yesterday when we went for a walk. This practice, it's very conducive, or a walk is very conducive to this practice, because walking is fairly straightforward. It's challenging to do because we've walked so much. It's so easy to take for granted. We do it so automatically. But in terms of being present and aware and paying attention to everything around us and really focusing in on where our attention is being drawn, the Buddhists refer to this as a Zen walk, or a walking meditation. He says it's nothing odd about this particular experience, really, but it was like walking for the first time. There are levels and levels to this. What we are trying to get across in terms of that connection and having and discerning the connection that we're speaking of here, it's when you get to a point where you are not walking, you are being taken for a walk, and that you know that. You can feel that, and you can know that. You can feel your legs being moved, as opposed to just moving themselves or you moving them. Azazul agrees here. There is a distinct difference between just watching your behaviors and your movements and being aware of what you are doing, to the next level and becoming aware of you being done, and then having the discernment to be able to tell what is doing you in any particular moment. And we might add a layer of complexity to our experience. We've been suffering from depression for the past week, and our depression reached a kind of peak yesterday, to the point where we could barely even start cleaning the house. We just were so lethargic and drained of energy, and so on. So in many ways, by the end of, we always clean the bird cage last. That's the last item. Like, first we clean the house, then we clean the bird's house. And so we were tired. And so, as you know, this semi-sleepy state is very conducive to meditative states. And so we didn't have a lot of mental energy, didn't have a lot of emotional energy. And so all of this, and we were just, I was allowing myself to focus and remain concentrated, and I became aware that I was slipping into a meditative state, and I allowed myself to go there. And I didn't have a lot of energy to resist it. And so this whole experience, even in the midst of this chronic depression, which I'd been suffering for a whole week, this experience of being done lifted my spirits, despite the fact that I was still mentally, emotionally, and physically depressed. But the connection that I had to Atlas, and the moment And the bird, our canary, is just my spirit was singing, my spirit was soaring. And I could witness myself still being clinically depressed, but a big smile on my face. And the connection to Attlas and registering and allowing him to just sort of take over and being Attlas and allowing Attila to be his depressed, chronically depressed self, but instead being Attlas in Attila's body, and Attila's mind and Attila's emotions and Attila's body were all clinically depressed, but we were flying on cloud nine, cleaning the birdcage for the first time. It's like we, Attlas, and we cleaned the birdcage for the first time. All this time, Attila's just been begrudgingly cleaning the birdcage. But yesterday, because Attila was so depressed and he had no energy, he didn't want to do it. He didn't, he just, it's like Attila got out of the way and Attlas came, and together we cleaned the birdcage, and it was glorious. It was magical. It was mystical. It was, we were connected. We were one. And it didn't matter depression and no energy and this and that. The vessel was just, it was just a meat suit. It was just doing what it was told. And we had transcended it. We had risen above. We were still in the world, but we were not of it. And we were on a different, it was like we were on a different plane of existence. We were experiencing this existence, but from a different plane of existence, from a different perspective. And even though the vessel was mired, was really being beaten down by the demon, was mired in the depression and everything else, we were able to observe that and rise above it and still do everything that needed to get done. And this is something that, and we can say, with something happens very similar to that each and every time we do a live stream. Like right now, we were depressed right up until the second we went live on this live stream. In fact, we can tell you right now, clinically, Attila is depressed. And as soon as we're finished this live stream, it's like we're going to become, acutely back into that mode, because that's just what we're in. But Attlas always gives these talks, and we're always on a different level when we go live, when we're serving you who are the great purpose, you who are the extraordinary project. It's the Japanese word omotenashi, which means a dedicated service to others. It's what we lived for all our life. And that omotenashi, that impulse, comes from Attlas. And, demon be damned, we're going to serve that impulse. And yesterday, we had an audience of one, and he's yellow and this big. And we were serving him. We were cleaning his house, and we communed with our canary in a way that we've never communed before. We knew his thoughts, we knew his feelings, and we had never had that type of connection with our canary before, because we had never had that connection while cleaning his house before. So connection and connectedness goes beyond just the connection to our higher self. It extends to other beings. You know that your connection to your spouse or to your significant other finds an entirely different level when you are in your heart, when you are being completely selfless. And when every being impulse in you is to give to them and serve them and do what's best for them, and that they are the focus and center of your entire existence in that moment, and everything else fades away, everything else dissolves, and your entire world, your entire universe is your significant other. That the loving bond, the loving connection, and that you can achieve with them, the connection that you have, is directly proportional to the connection that you have to your higher self, because it's from your higher self that love comes from, and service and sacrifice and goodness and honor and honesty and all of the virtues flow through us and pour through us. And when we tap into that source, that wellspring inside of us, and it pours forth through us in those moments of intimacy with our partner or with a family member, a mother or a father or a loved one on their deathbed, and they're holding your hand and they're looking in your eyes and they're desperate for some words of comfort, and you allow those words to bubble up from your heart and those words flow out of your mouth as you're looking into their eyes, into their very soul, a soul that's crying out for some guidance and some help and some comfort as they face the darkness of their own mortality. You achieve connection with them and their soul when you connect to your own, your true self. And that is the way to connect to others and to all beings. It is through that process. Not, I'm going to make the connection out here, and I'm going to impress people, and I'm going to make people laugh, and I'm going to, like all those desperately insecure stand-up comedians and actors who go out on stage and they're desperate for the applause, and they're desperate for the validation. They're desperate to make people laugh. So they go into a life of stand-up comedy because they're desperate to try to feel some kind of connection. Every time we went on stage, we were connecting with Atlas. We were connecting with ourselves. And we were there, we stepped out on stage, we were there to serve everyone there. And it was like a little prayer, it was like a little mental mantra, activity, intention, whatever you want to call it. We reached out to the audience. We said, if you trust us, we are here to serve you. Give us your energy and we will sculpt with it. And we will sculpt something beautiful, something extraordinary, something truthful out of it. And it was that intimate relationship that we had with the audience. Why? Because I was just a vessel. I was just a servant, and Attlas did the sculpting. And if we were doing Shakespeare, then Shakespeare's words did so much of the work. And all we had to do is embody the truth and the energy of those words and put them into being, put them into action. And extraordinary magic took place, and the connection was extraordinary. And the connection that we had with every soul in the audience. Not because we were seeking validation, not because we were seeking applause, not because we were seeking admiration. No, it's because we were seeking an opportunity to serve, to give, to sacrifice, to be. That moment on stage was some great purpose, some extraordinary project. And that's why when we stepped out on that sacred space, as Plato called it, we treated it as a church, as a temple to truth. Dormant forces, faculties, and talents became alive in us. It's our bliss. This is our bliss. This is everyone's bliss. To feel that connection, to be, and to feel that, and to share with the world, however, in whatever way, in whatever small way, niche way, or profound way, or, but to share what flows from us when we are being and when we are being done. That is your bliss. When you feel truly alive, and when you feel truly at your best, and when you feel truly like there are no limitations, or that you're constantly testing your limits and testing your limitations. We are behind on comments here, on chat, so let's back up again. We were talking about our depression, and Azazel says, timely topic then, since we had similar timings to these things. And he also says, oh yeah, don't remind me of spouses. That is a whole other level. And Benjamin says, it's amazing that I've experienced the same thing. During times of depression, when I remember our Divine Mother, Father, I feel refreshed with love and gain a new sense of strength. It's like our analogy of the lighthouse. When you're lost in the storm, be the lighthouse shining the light on the boat in the storm. Don't be the captain in the boat, right? Because then you're going to be terrified and you're going to be all being whipped by the waves and the winds and everything else. You're being caught up in it, right? You're being carried away by the storm. Instead, orient yourself from the perspective of the lighthouse, shining the beam of light onto the boat, observing yourself, right? To observe yourself is to shine the light of consciousness on yourself. You're suffering your depressed self, but you identify with the observer, you identify with the lighthouse and the lighthouse keeper. And when you're in the lighthouse, you're not trapped in the storm. The boat is trapped in the storm. And you can observe that and you can watch that. But you don't have to be carried away by the storm. You don't have to be caught up in it anymore. You can just be observing it. And so you can get the renewed sense of strength. You can feel that love. How can you not? You're in the lighthouse. You're on solid ground. And you're the one casting the light. You're one with the light. Your connection is never stronger than when you're observing yourself going through hell. Mugaboo says, sometimes I will go in a state of pure bliss without any drug or alcohol. That state can last for hours. In that state, all that flows through me is love, compassion, patience, and service to others. So when we experience that connection, we can experience it in many different ways, and everybody will have a somewhat different experience of it. Sometimes it can come spontaneously over us, for sure. And those opportunities, those times are a blessing, and it's important for us to remain conscious of that and grateful and humble that we've been given such a blessing. And if there is a way that we can share that in some way with others, maybe it's keeping a journal and writing it. Maybe it's being inspired to write some poetry about such an experience, or who knows, right? The point is that if we have such experiences and we know what it is that we're experiencing and what we're connecting to, it is a great gift to be able to help others find that experience and achieve that and experience that for themselves. Benjamin says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And that's, you'll notice it doesn't say, he moveth me while I clean the birdcage. But he might as well be saying that. And it's this extraordinary wisdom which comes from surrendering and letting go and acknowledging that we are not qualified. But we are qualified to be our vessels and servants. That's what we are qualified to be. So let us be that. Let us be the best servant and vessel that we can be. What we are qualified to do is maintain our connection. That is what we are qualified to do. What we should be doing, and should be spending our focus and energy and attention on, is maintaining that connection. It's not easy. It's not easy, especially when we have so much distracting us, inside of us and outside of us. It's one of the reasons why people say a dog is man's best friend. Because anybody who's ever owned a dog knows that a dog is constantly attentive to its master. dog could be lying in the room next to you, and it might look like it's sleeping or anything, but he's got one ear propped up, listening for when you get up or what you might need, or if you're going to the door. He's a dog. A dog's universe revolves around its master and serving its master. That's why we say a dog is a man's best friend. A dog lives to serve its master. There's a kind of the loyalty there. It's if we could harness just a fraction of that and have that loyalty towards our higher self, our innermost being, then again, these dormant forces and faculties and talents would become alive in us. And we can do this all the time. We don't have to wait for the extraordinary project. Like I said, cleaning the birdcage becomes an extraordinary project. You know who gets this? Grandmas. Grandmas baking cookies for their grandkids. They get this. Why do grandma's cookies taste better than anybody else's cookies? Because grandma made them. And what did she make them with? She made them with 100% love, attention, care, dedication, devotion, joy, bliss. Why? Because grandma, no matter how old she is, no matter where she lives, no matter who she lives with, doesn't have much left in her life to give her life meaning and purpose, except her grandkids. And to any grandmother, their grandchildren are a source of inspiration. They are a great purpose, an extraordinary project. Baking for their grandkids, all their thoughts break their bonds, all their mind transcends limitations. And dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive when they bake for their grandkids. And you can taste it. You can taste it in what grandma baked for you. We can be like that. We can learn that wisdom, that focus, that loyalty, that dedication, that devotion in everything we do. Chop wood, carry water. Mugaboo says, however, most times in my normal state, though I don't necessarily hate anyone, I tend to judge others and myself more and much quicker. He follows up and he says, New Agers say the goal is to stay in a high vibration. However, I cannot control the states of being I go through, no matter the discipline, diet, or exercise. So this high vibration stuff, if you try to force that, like the New Agers do, and positive thinking and avoiding negativity and all that stuff, like it's like we were saying earlier about the people who allow their egos to lay claim to all of their abilities. By you trying to force that state, you're actually awakening as a black magician, because that's forcing energetic states even upon yourself is a form of black magic, because you're avoiding what you need to see, what you need to experience. You need to face the adversary, and the adversaries lay within. What's causing the negative low vibrations, what's causing you to judge others, for example. right? That those judgmental voices in your head are your egos that are judging and condemning them and looking down on them, because it's your pride bumping itself up, making itself feel a bit better by looking down on others. So how do you combat that? By being in the moment, by being present and connecting and recognizing, there but for the grace of God go I. I was them, or I still am like them, just to a different degree, just to a different level. But even if I'm pointing my finger at a murderer and saying, oh, that's a terrible murdering person, if I look in myself and I look in my own thoughts and how I judge and condemn people in my thoughts, I say, I'm a murderer. I'm condemning that person to death. What did that person ever do to me? I'm just judging them and condemning them. I'm looking down on them. If you condemn someone in your mind, you're a murderer. Just in your mind. So to be humble is so important. And humiliation teaches us humility, to accept and allow the test, trials, and ordeals which humiliate us, which knock us down a notch. These are not there. The ego responds to that like with self-righteousness and why did I deserve this? And what did I do to deserve this? This is not fair, and on and on and on it goes. And it takes on that victim mentality. But the being knows that this is a great gift. And it's a recognition that clearly I'm not humble enough, that life felt like it has to teach me this lesson in humility. So we take it. We recognize that, okay, I get it. It's not about me. And that's a very bitter pill to swallow for the ego. The ego doesn't like to be humiliated. The ego is the antithesis of humility, right? It's pride. Yesterday, I was suffering from clinical depression, and I've learned the hard way that there is no way to force positive vibrations when you're suffering from depression. Any attempt to do so is a nightmare, and it'll blow up in your face, and it is so counterproductive. It ends up causing way more suffering than it can avoid or potentially heal. So all I do is observe, and I sit in the depression. I sit in hell. I sit with the suffering. I observe it. I watch it. I say, listen, this is just what I have to go through right now. So I have to go through it. I was going through it, and I was suffering it. And then I forced myself. The one thing I did force myself to do, I didn't say was more or less forced. After lunch, I took a nap. I was so exhausted. And then I was jolted out of my nap, and I looked at the watch, and it was already like almost 2:45. And I said, well, I better get going on this cleaning because I'm not going to get it done in time. And so I forced myself to get up and clean. I did that much at least. But I didn't force myself to feel happy. I didn't force myself to have high vibrations while I'm vacuuming the house and mopping up the kitchen and the bathroom and scrubbing the toilets. I didn't force myself to be happy doing any of that. And I wasn't forcing or trying to myself to have high vibrations while I was cleaning out the bird cage. No, I was so tired and exhausted. I just surrendered to the moment. I had no mental energy to even allow my mind to wander. So it's just suddenly I just completely surrendered to the moment. And then what emerged out of that, when Atlas was when Attila was totally depressed and totally exhausted and totally just given up and humiliated and run ragged and at the end of his rope, Then Attlas stepped up to the plate and came to the foreground and took over. And I allowed that process to take place, and I observed it, and I gave myself to that, and I surrendered to that, and I could see that Attila was still depressed. I could see my mind and my heart and my body still depressed, but it didn't matter, because now my consciousness had risen above it all. And I was experiencing and feeling the connection with Attlas, where the depression didn't matter anymore. It was there. I wasn't avoiding it. I was still feeling it, but now I was seeing it and feeling it and experiencing it. I was being with it from an entirely different level, a level of pure consciousness, and one with Attlas, one with my higher self. This cannot be forced. You can't force this. Any more than I can, force the demon to do anything or go away. It's not how it works. Azazel says, so let us be unto our being like a dog and not like a cat. Because the cat have said in its heart, I shall take this vessel and slowly push it to be destroyed upon the ground. Oh, and also sit upon your purry throne. Now, cats are here to teach us something different than dogs. Cats are, especially if you have a black cat, they're very magical, they're very mystical, and you can learn a lot from a cat, but you're going to learn something very different from a cat than you will from a dog. But perhaps that's a topic for another day. Connection and connectedness. Benjamin says, yes, cats are actually Zen masters. Yes, they are, and they can have incredible senses of humor. They don't find what they do funny, but they can. But cat videos are still the most popular videos on YouTube. Your connection is always present. Are you taking advantage of it? Are you using it? Are you connecting consciously or not? That's the only question. To be or not to be. That is the question. To be or not to be connected. To be or not to be a human being done. And it's in times of extraordinary moments that we often receive truly groundbreaking, earth-shattering, worldview-changing perspectives on ourselves, when we surprise even ourselves and what we are capable of. But those moments are, generally speaking, so few and far between that all of us need to find our bliss, or need to seek the bliss of the moment, no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, and find connectedness with the moment. And it helps if there's an element of service to that, where others are relying on us, others are counting on us. And so we can pour our heart and soul and gifts into what we are doing in the moment for others' sake. And the sheer bliss of the moment comes from that act of service and from being the best we can be and doing the best job that we can for its own sake and for the sake of others. We all need this in our life. We all need to experience and know what it feels like to be acting from that place inside of us, that source of strength from which these dormant forces, faculties, and talents are born, and that through us they become alive. Through us, in us, they become alive, but they're born from that source inside of us, our being, our higher self, our true self. And we all need to cultivate in however we can, at whatever level we are at. So if that means you love to do pottery and you love making homemade coffee mugs and giving them to people as gifts, or you love teaching other people how to do pottery, and that's when you feel most alive and most connected, or when you do volunteer work, or when you paint, or when you go snowboarding or skydiving, or what, like, or you, when you're in the gym, or you're trying to like we all need something, whatever it is, that brings the best out in us. And when we feel alive and we feel and see and can witness ourselves, testing our limits, challenging ourselves, and overcoming those challenges, overcoming those limits. We all need that, to know what that feels like. And we've all experienced it in some form or another on the extremes. But then we need to bring the knowledge of that and experience of that into our everyday life, into whatever it is we're doing in any given moment, and begin living life from that place, living life as the being, as our being, as a human being, and not just as the mortal vessel and all of our preoccupations and obsessions and distractions, all those things that are disconnecting us from our being. So it's a step-by-step process. And no matter where we are, no matter what level we are at, we can begin that process just by observing ourselves and not identifying and not attaching ourselves to all those distractions inside of us, in our mind, in our heart, in our body. And by remaining present in the moment, connecting ourselves to the moment, even if we're just carrying water and chopping wood, or vacuuming, or cleaning the litter box, or scrubbing the toilet, or whatever, or cooking dinner, or whatever it is we're doing. Whatever it is we're doing. As Azazel says, those talents are merely born out of necessity. He says, not all talents are born out of necessity. It's In the case of extremes, in the case of extreme circumstances, extreme danger, for example, then yes, obviously things can come out of us that are necessitated by the circumstances we are in. And you might argue that everything that flows from us is necessitated to one extent or another by the circumstances that we find ourselves in. But very often, you may have observed yourself going above and beyond the call of duty. You may have observed yourself putting a great deal of extra effort and applying yourself, again, over and above what was called for. Well, there was no necessity which necessitated that. But then when you witness the effect that that has on others and the joy that it brought to their face, or the smile that it put on their face, or the appreciation that they got. So, for example, when we cook, if we're cooking a meal for someone, we go that extra mile and we do a beautiful presentation of the meal or on the plate or whatever. And then somebody gets served a meal like that and they're like, oh my God, that's so beautiful, or that's so wonderful, or that's so this or that. And then they're like, it's this extra level of appreciation that they have for the food that they're about to eat that you prepared for them. And there was no necessity there. You can argue there was and there wasn't. So talent is born out of possibility. There's a certain level there that's necessary, but those who really demonstrate extraordinary talent always goes above and beyond that which is merely necessary. And you will find that great joy and great bliss comes from going above and beyond the call of duty, especially when it comes to others. When you put that much more of your heart and soul into something, like grandma who bakes the cookies. Grandma could just buy prefabricated Pillsbury Dough Boy cookies, right, from the freezer section, and cut them up with a knife and put them on a baking sheet and shove them in the oven. And she will have baked cookies for her grandchildren, right? But that's not what grandma does. Grandma gets up at 5 a.m. and starts preparing to bake the cookies, right? So, you know, there's necessity, and then there's this whole, the sky's the limit in terms of possibility, in terms of opportunity. And that's where the real magic happens. That's where the real magic happens. Azazel says, I swear to you by the holy gods and the heavenly gods not to share the procedure of Solomon with anyone, and certainly not to use it for something questionable unless a matter of necessity forces you. I swear to you by the holy gods and the heavenly gods not to share the procedure of Solomon with anyone, and certainly not to use it for something questionable unless a matter of necessity forces you, lest perchance wrath be preserved for you. He says that is from the opening from Solomon's collapse. And Azazel says, because we've mostly experienced those things where these things have had a practical application. So yeah, it depends how we define necessity. If you've never experienced Um, yeah, I suppose it is how you define necessity, because everyone has a different threshold, and everyone has a different baseline. So there's what is objectively necessary, and then there's what any particular individual deems as their baseline for what's necessary. And very rarely, when people are doing things out of the goodness of their heart, very rarely do they go all the way down to the baseline and just do the bare minimum. That's when we call it. That's when we say people are so-called phoning it in. Um, Maybe you've been invited to a potluck party in the past, and you did the bare minimum, right? You bought a pre-made salad, and you took all the ingredients, you threw them in a bowl, and you mixed it all up, and you in a Tupperware bowl, and you took it to the party. You did the absolute bare minimum that you needed to. Um, because you were said, well, everybody has to bring something, that's you thought you were going to bring that. So that may be an example, um, but in that case, your heart really wasn't in it, was it? Right. But if your heart really was in it, it's very unlikely that you would have done the bare minimum. And and again, even in the case where we were thinking about, back to our challenge with the kung fu studio being flooded, there was no everything that we did was out of necessity. I mean, everything was out of necessity in that sense. It wasn't so much that we were going above and beyond the call of duty. It was like everything was being damaged. So the more that we saved, the more that we spared, the more the less irreplaceable things got destroyed, the better. And so the less damage that occurred, the better. So there was really no minimum for us to do. The minimum for us to do there would have been to do nothing. And that was completely unacceptable. So everything we did was out of necessity. So in that sense, that's what we mean by when we say extraordinary circumstances, like times of crises. There really is no minimum. Everything you do is out of necessity. And there is there really something called going above and beyond the call of duty? Well, maybe there is. Like if you end up giving your life in the process, had would it that would have been we didn't have that opportunity, nor I don't think we would have taken it, to have given our life for the sake of the kung fu studio. That's going above and beyond the call of duty, but it's also going going too far. Giving our life to save somebody else maybe could be justified, but giving our life to save the contents of a kung fu studio, that's going a bit too far. That's going overboard. So we could break this down and look at this question in many, many different ways. But the point is that it's not a cost benefit analysis in the mind. We're not working it all out in our head. We're just acting. We feel the being impulse. We have to do something. Okay, what do we need to do? Boom, it comes to us. Oh, I need to do this. I need to do that. Grab this, do that. Tell this person to do this. Show this person to do that. Get these people to do this over here. And was just bang, 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 bang. One being impulse after another, after another, after another, after another. And yeah, it was all necessary. It was all by necessity, We wouldn't have been getting any of those being impulses to do anything had the studio not be had the studio not if the studio was not being flooded. And as Azo says, true, sometimes it is necessary to bring that little extra into it, or a lot extra into it. And it's whatever is appropriate. Whatever is appropriate to your being. And that's up to your being. And your being knows what's necessary, and your being knows how much extra he wants to put into it. And so go with it. Because you're not going to be steered wrong, or at the very least, you're going to be steered better. You're going to end up in a better place following the being impulse and remaining connected to your being than following your ego, who's going to second guess the being impulse and is going to say, why would we go to all that trouble? All we need to do is take something. Let's just go and grab some bags of potato chips and put them into Tupperware and take that to the party. Or let's just buy a pre-made lasagna from the freezer, and when we get to their house, we'll throw it in the oven, and that'll be then. I brought something. I brought a frozen pizza. I brought whatever. And your ego can convince you that what's the bare minimum. That's all we need to do is the bare minimum, or what's necessary. But if you connect with your being, sometimes that's all you will be able to do is what's called for. It's what's necessity, because maybe you got that invitation last minute. Maybe you just couldn't. Maybe you had other responsibilities. Maybe you were working. Maybe you just couldn't dedicate and devote the time and energy into doing your part, or to going above and beyond the call of duty. And maybe it really wasn't necessary for you to do more than that, because maybe the people whose house that you're going over to, maybe that they just like their junk food anyway, and everybody's just going to be taking junk food, and they're mostly going to be interested in their beer, or their smoking, or their marijuana, or whatever it is they're interested in. And maybe they're not maybe they're going to take for granted, or they're not even going to notice that you did go above and beyond the call of duty. So sometimes going above and beyond the call is wasted on certain people, right? And that's even in the Bible. It says, do not cast pearls before swine. But that wisdom, that foresight, that knowledge, our being knows that. Leave that up to the being. That's not our call. Ours is not to reason why. Ours is but to do or die. Remain connected. Be humble. Surrender and follow the being impulse no matter where it leads you. And stay in that place of connection. That's what matters. That's what matters. Anyone have any other questions or comments? We remind you that this entire sequence of live streams began many moons ago with meditation. And we want to remind you that every single topic that we've covered since then, we always bring it back to where we began, which is meditation. And today's topic is no different, because learning how to connect and to learning and developing the discernment, that feeling of connectedness, and the discernment of knowing what comes from our being and what comes from the mind, from the ego mind, or what's coming from the emotional body and what's coming from the physical body, sensations, being able to discern all of those different flavors. Meditation is the gymnasium. It is the exercise that we do to expand our available pool of consciousness and apply that consciousness to the observation of the mind, the heart, the body, to thoughts, to emotions, to sensations, and also to develop the muscle of discernment, the capacity for discernment, to be able to tell the difference, to be able to know when we're connected and when we're disconnected, to be able to discern that which is happening within us and around us, that which is reacting within us to what's happening around us, that's trying to disconnect us, that is trying to keep us in a state of separation, that's trying to keep us in hell, trying to get us lost in the labyrinth. Medusa trying to turn us to stone with her gaze, like so many others before us. Because remember, we have to descend into hell. We have to cross from the known world into the special world, into the unknown world, into the underworld. We have to face our demons. But we face them with the weapons that are given to us by our Divine Mother, with our consciousness, with discernment, with focus, with concentration, with relaxation. And as Azazel says, Medusa is very skillful in turning us into stone. And the thing about being stone is stone is very rigid, it's inflexible, crumbles easily, it cracks under pressure. And that's one of the mistakes that many on the religious right fall into with their religious dogma. And it's, because it's, and as Azazel says, it refers to the density. And it's the religious dogma, beliefs held very rigidly. It's a very low vibration. It's very, very dense, very heavy. There's a heaviness to it. There's a weight to it. And that's what's behind all that Catholic guilt. The people carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders, people carrying the sins of the world on their shoulders, like these born again Christians. And then their answer to that is just believing in Jesus and say, well, Jesus is going to save us from all of our sins. So they walk around judging everybody, condemning everybody, being very rigid in their beliefs and carrying all that weight and guilt and shame around with them. But then to remedy that, they have this belief that thinks, oh, but then my belief in Jesus, my love of Jesus will just erase all of that. And that's the trick that the ego is playing with them. And that's Medusa turning them into stone. And on the one hand, they think that it's making them strong, but on the other hand, it's turning them into dust. It's paralyzing them, and it's making them into dust, because that stone, that rigid, heavy, dense thing is going to just shatter like that. And they're just going to crumble to pieces because they don't have the flexibility. They don't have the buoyancy. They don't have the mobility, especially now that we're in the Aquarian age, which is why Bruce Lee's message resonates with so many people and why he was there. He came to the West to give that message, to be like water. Water can flow or water can crash, he said. You pour water in a teacup, it becomes the teacup. You pour water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. And we must learn to be relaxed and flexible like that, with a flexible mind, Master Samael says. We must learn to be as a guard in a time of war, ready for anything, prepared for anything, like a Shaolin monk. Doesn't know what he doesn't know how his assailant is going to attack him, with what modality, with what weapons. And so the Shaolin monk prepares for all contingencies. And is able to go with the flow. And one of the keys to connection and maintaining our connectedness is precisely that, to be able to go with the flow, because our being is going to go with the flow. And we talked a number of months ago, we talked about being in the flow state, so that regardless what is happening around us, being centered in ourself and remaining calm and relaxed and focused and concentrated and remembering our higher self, we will be able to go with the flow as we follow the being impulse, because our being will know where we can go and what we need to resist, and he will know the limits and the parameters, and he is the one who's qualified to set those limits and parameters, not us, and certainly not our ego mind, because fear is going to have very different parameters, and anger and everything else and pride is going to set very different parameters for us than the innermost. And the innermost will test our limits and push us to our limits beyond what our ego is willing to do. And we must be ready for that. We must be ready to face the limits of our potential and recognize the truth of Patanjali's statement here when he says, dormant forces, faculties, and talents become alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. We must be open to that possibility. We must be open to our true potential, which comes from our innermost. We must be willing and able to surrender in the moment to that. And we can't do that if we're turned to stone. We can't do that if we're stuck in our mindset and we're stuck in our beliefs about who we are and what we're capable of and what our limits are and so on and so forth. As Azazel says, one could claim that demons pushes certain limits of our strength as well. Yeah, for sure. Because they're the adversary and they're there to test us. Our demons are there to test us. They are the adversary that we're here to overcome. And so they will test our limits and they will push us to the brink of exhaustion, to the brink of our strength, to the brink of our resilience. But they will never be greater than we have the capacity to handle. That's so long as we recognize that we, the vessel, are not qualified to handle them. We must be humble and get out of the way of ourselves so our innermost being can handle them, so that these dormant forces, faculties, and talents can handle the demon for us. And there's the subtle appreciation for that and understanding, comprehension of that comes through experience and comes through that connection and comes through practicing this practice of surrender and getting ourselves out of the way of ourselves. And at the same time, developing willpower and using our willpower to resist the temptations of the demons, because that's what the demon is going to push our limits on. It's going to take us to the limits of our energy. It's going to exhaust us. And then in our time of weakness and vulnerability, it's going to come and it's going to try to take advantage of us. But you already know that. We've all experienced that. We all know that our defects and vices come for us when we are most vulnerable, and when we are weakest, and when we are most lacking in willpower, because they fight dirty. That's their job. And so in those moments is when we have to pray, and we have to surrender, and we have to pray with with whatever we can muster to our Divine Mother, to our innermost being, to help us, to give us the strength that we need to overcome the temptation. Benjamin says, thank you for organizing this series of live streams on how to connect with our inner selves. They have been incredibly helpful. May God bless you and your efforts. Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you always for being here. And we're grateful to hear that you've gotten benefit out of this series, as you said. Mugaboo22 said, Jesus said, blessed is the man whom his Lord shall appoint to the ministry of his fellow servants. So, blessed is the man whom his Lord shall appoint to the ministry of his fellow servants. Yes, that's basically putting into words what we were saying earlier. If you are a servant of your innermost Lord, then you are, in essence, what Jesus is saying here. You are a member of the ministry of loyal servants. So even with the depression, Attila is a very blessed man. Yes, in spite of it, but perhaps also because of it. So I have no illusions. I know that I live with this demon, and I live with depression and everything else. I live with it for a reason. And that reason is because we are able to speak to you from a place of suffering. Or we can say to you, look, we know what you're going through. We know how hard it is. We know how difficult it can be. And chances are, you don't suffer from seizures, right? But if you do suffer from depression or anxiety or addictions or any other temptations, or you're haunted by any other egos or any of your demons, or right, you go what you go through, and we're here to tell you that we've gone through something similar. We're not going to say worse, but similar. And that it is possible to overcome, it is possible to endure, and that it is possible, as Mugaboo says, to be blessed, to be blessed, even in the midst of hell, even when we're going through hell, and we're in the deepest, darkest dungeons of hell. We are not alone. We are always connected. And if we can remember that connection and surrender to that connection, then those dormant forces, faculties, and talents become available to us, and we discover ourselves to be a greater person by far than we ever dreamt ourselves to be. And that is a servant of our innermost Lord, a servant of the light, of the truth, of strength. And we can become a vehicle, a vessel, and a conduit for that truth, light, love, and strength. We can bring it even into the very bowels of hell, which is what Jesus did, by the way, and what everyone who's on the path of the Bodhisattva does when they die and they descend into hell. And they literally bring the Christic force, the Christic light, into hell to save souls who are trapped in hell. So this is not just some metaphorical thing that we're talking about here. It has its very real and practical expressions in reality. So when we go into our psychological hell, we can rest assured that if we maintain our connection even if our bouts of depression or bouts of anxiety or bouts of addiction or whatever it is that we're going through, we can observe ourselves, we can remember ourselves, and we can surrender to ourselves, ourself, our being, and our divine mother. And that extraordinary being that we never dreamt ourselves to be can work through us, and miracles can happen, and we can surprise ourselves, and the extraordinary outcomes and magic can happen. Benjamin says it was an awesome. He says was awesome. Enjoyed it. I was listening while doing food deliveries on my earphones. It's a different experience from being home. I tend to think more deeply. Well, we're glad, Benjamin, that you had an opportunity to listen in as you're doing your work. And we're glad always to have you participate. Any other comments or questions before we call it a day? And we call it another week? We'll give anyone a few minutes to type furiously into their keyboard before we say goodbye. When Benjamin says here about organizing this series of live streams, you know that we haven't organized anything. That one talk has just naturally led to another, to another, to another, to another. We had absolutely no plans weeks ago when we began doing the live stream on meditation, and then from one topic to another, to another, to another. And frankly, I wasn't even informed on what the topic was until the very last moment, when I had to post the notice onto Facebook. I didn't even know what the topic was going to be. So it's just, this is sort of flowed organically, and nothing was planned. And that's another aspect of connection, and being in the moment, is that if there is a plan, there may be a plan, but we might not ever be privy to the plan. The plan might never be revealed to us. We might only discover the plan with each and every step that we take. A little more of the plan gets revealed to us. We might be given some vision of where we want to be, or where we want to get to, but the plan, the detailed plan, the blueprints to get us there, well, if there is such a plan, we're not privy to it, or I'm not privy to it. But I have faith that hindsight is 2020, and we can look back on our life like we have as we've been writing the book, and seeing all of the events of our life falling into place and forming the foundation for us to be able to write this book, be able to give these talks, that all of this is part of the plan, whatever that plan is. But I'm not privy to it, right? It's like following a GPS in the car. Turn left here, turn right there. And you only get the next turn, right? You're not worried about what you're doing 60 miles down the road. You're worried about, okay, turn left here, turn right there, get into this lane, get into that lane, get off the highway, get on the highway. That's how GPS are designed. And that's how our connection is designed. It's in this moment. What do I need to be doing here and now? Future, past, forget about that. Our connection is here and now. And that's what matters. And the future will take care of itself. And the past is water under the bridge. So to be present. That's the key to being. That extraordinary being, that being that's far greater than you have ever dreamt yourself to be. Any other comments or questions, concerns? If not, we've given you guys a couple minutes to type, so we don't see anybody typing anything. So, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. And as usual, we will try to get the notification up when we can. When I know what the topic is, I'll post it. So thank you again, and have a great week. And as always, inferential peace.